Garmin just released their new top-of-the-line do-everything watch with their sharpest AMOLED display, their latest greatest software advancements, improved heart rate tracking, and even a built-in flashlight. Apple just announced some of what's coming to WatchOS 10 for their top-of-the-line do-everything, durable, outdoor-focused Apple Watch Ultra. So, with all of these new big announcements, it got me thinking, how does the Apple Watch Ultra compare to the all-new Garmin Epix Pro? Okay, let's start off with a few similarities before diving deeper into the key differences that might compel you to jump from one camp over to the other. And I'm comparing the sapphire titanium option on the Garmin Epix Pro, but they do make a Gorilla Glass stainless steel version for $100 less. The Apple Watch Ultra, it doesn't really have any options, well, at least any options yet. It's pretty much one color and one material option. But these sapphire crystal displays are extremely durable. So with either of these watches, you should see less scratches across the front of that display itself. Now, both iterations of these watches use titanium within the watch body itself, although I will say that the Epix Pro kind of has this plastic middle layer. A little bit less noticeable, there's actually a tiny GPS antenna pass-through on the Apple Watch Ultra. You can see it right under the edge of the display here. It's super hard to notice, but it is actually there. And here, here's an X-ray view of the Apple Watch Ultra, so you can see that a little bit more clearly here on the edge. And of course, if either of these watches were fully enclosed in titanium or some other metal, connectivity would, it'd be an absolute disaster. But the connectivity on these devices, they're actually somewhat similar. They both host multi-band GPS chipsets, meaning that they can use multiple frequencies to simultaneously connect to multiple satellite systems to provide you with the most accurate GPS signal possible. We'll dive into GPS accuracy and compare both a little bit later in the video. But sticking with connectivity, both of these devices have Bluetooth. Both of them have Wi-Fi, but only the Garmin has Ant Plus wireless capabilities, which could become critical for you, kind of depending upon which types of different cycling hardware you're hoping to connect to this watch. Now, both of these displays are similar. They're both using an AMOLED display, and they're actually similar in pixel density. For example, the Epix Pro, it's a 47mm watch in this particular case, and this one has a 1.3-inch display, 416 by 416 pixels, or a pixel density of 452 pixels per square inch. And the Apple Watch Ultra has a 1.9-inch square display with 410 by 502 pixels, or about 338 pixels per square inch. But as far as pixel density and sharpness goes, it's really hard to tell the difference between these two. Both of these watches look extremely sharp, and they both have touchscreens. I'd say they both feel, reasonably responsive. Although to me, if I were to award the trophy for most responsive, I would give it to the Apple Watch, just because it does tend to always be so responsive. Whereas Garmin, basically what I'm seeing is occasionally you'll notice some lagginess to the device. And I actually think that that's Garmin cycling down the responsiveness of this watch, or cycling down the CPU, potentially just so that it does save on battery life. And then, it speeds it right back up when you press a button or you touch the screen, but it does take a second to kind of get back up and rolling. Now, the Apple Watch Ultra is also significantly brighter. It's 2000 nits of brightness, whereas the Epix Pro is only about half that brightness. And as an AMOLED outdoor watch, that extra brightness can come in pretty handy, as these displays basically have to overpower the sun when they're out there to be seen. But both watches have me covered with detailed activity tracking when it comes to lap swimming or open water swimming, indoor biking, outdoor biking, track running, trail running, or even a complete triathlon. Both watches will also track your sleep, and overall, they're not all that different in size and weight. The Garmin Epix Pro that I'm wearing here is 47mm wide, whereas the Apple Watch Ultra is more like 42 millimeters wide, but again, it's a little bit taller because of that square aspect ratio of the watch. And I should also mention that the Epix Pro now comes in 3 sizes. So you have a 42 millimeter size, a 47 millimeter size, and a 51 millimeter size. And those sizes do affect the weight and the display, of course. So that's a 1.2 inch screen, a 1.3 inch screen, or a 1.4 inch screen respectively. And they're both similar in water resistance, both down to about 100 meters. And both watches have a really good optical heart rate sensors. Both of those sensors can also do blood oxygen saturation levels or SpO2 levels. But what about ECGs? Well, the Apple Watch Ultra has been FDA approved to do these wrist-based ECGs, whereas the Garmin, it does have all the hardware that's needed to do an ECG, and they do have other watches in their arsenal that do ECG, but it's yet to have been approved by the FDA. And so we'll just have to wait and see if the ECG functionality comes to this Garmin Epix Pro. But I suspect it will, making it just another way that these two watches are similar. But I have this gut feeling that you guys aren't here to hear about their similarities. You'd much prefer to hear what those key differences are between these two watches. And in a strange twist of fate, the Sapphire Epix Pro actually cost more than the Apple Watch Ultra. The Garmin tax is higher than the Apple Watch tax. The Apple Watch Ultra is an $800 device, and this edition of the Garmin Epix Pro is $1,000. So the Epix Pro does have a little bit of a range in price. It actually ranges in price from $900 to $1,100, and those prices are based on both material options that you have here as well as different sizing options. But switching back over to the hardware comparison between the Apple Watch Ultra and the Epix Pro, you can see that the round watch here actually has 5 buttons, and everything that can be done on the watch can be done with buttons on this device. So you can navigate with a touchscreen or buttons, and it defaults to buttons when you end up getting into an activity that you want to track. And I actually love the way that Garmin does this in comparison to the way that Apple has it set up. I actually had one triathlon race where the start was in the water, and I literally couldn't start my watch before the race because the screen was a touchscreen and it was wet and it was super frustrating. But there's been some software updates, and you can now use the action button to start a race, but you still need to use the touch screen to stop an activity. I would suggest again that you guys use that action button to just pause your activity after your race so you get an accurate time of your finish, and then whenever you have time to dry that touch screen off, you can end the activity with an accurate time. Now there are other hardware differences besides the buttons on the Garmin. For example, the Epix Pro has a built-in flashlight, which I have found extremely valuable. And yes, I know that the Apple Watch Ultra can use its screen as a flashlight. You can even actually set the action button to turn on the flashlight if you want to. It's not the same. It's just not the same as having a dedicated LED flashlight like you have on the Epix Pro that's just built in there, 2 button presses, and you've got it fired up. It's a fantastic little option. Other hardware differences, the Apple Watch Ultra has a surprisingly good set of little speakers built in here. It also has a microphone built in, but the speakers come in handy because the watch itself has a built-in emergency siren, and with those speakers, it actually kind of broadcasts that emergency sound a pretty good ways. And the microphone is obviously needed to make calls, do voice to text, or even talk to the Siri assistant. Hey Siri, let's reply to the meanest comment within this video with an eggplant emoji. All of those features are features that Garmin just doesn't have. And that's kind of the big theme with this video. The Apple Watch Ultra is still a smarter smartwatch than the Garmin Epix Pro. And it's still a very good activity tracker. But the Epix Pro, its entire existence is absolutely built around being a high-end activity tracker with some smartwatch features. It'll show notifications, for example, but it's not gonna show image attachments from text messages that you get. You can't make calls with it, but you can do some canned responses if your Garmin is connected to an Android phone, but Apple doesn't allow third-party watches to do those same sort of canned text replies. So it's really pretty slim pickings when it comes to all of these connected smartwatch features on the Garmin Epix Pro. Now, when it comes directly to the activities that I personally care most about, so that's swimming, biking, and running, Apple seems to be making a ton of progress here, but Garmin still has a massive advantage. For example, within swimming, Garmin watches will show you rest times, leave times. They even have a section for drills. They call it like their drill mode option. Whereas the Apple Watch, it's a little bit more of a set it and forget it kind of situation when it comes to swimming. It'll try to keep track of how much you've swum, what strokes you've been doing within your swim, and it'll all kind of do that automatically. Whereas the Garmin can do that as well. You can kind of set it and forget it, and it'll try to automatically detect your splits. But you have the option to do manual splits with the Garmin, which I prefer just because they end up being a little bit more precise. And I think a lot of people are fine with Apple just kind of taking care of everything for them and kind of giving them a grand total for their swim. It'll also detect your kick sets on the Apple Watch, which again is great. I just still very much prefer Garmin when it comes to swimming. But then on to cycling, where Apple has made some pretty good strides with WatchOS 10. The Apple Watch can now be connected to speed cadence sensors and power meters, which is pretty big for, cycling geeks like myself. You can also use your phone as a cycling computer of sorts. I've played around with it a little bit. It's all super early right now, but it's pretty impressive. I'll probably make a separate video talking specifically about the Apple Watch for cycling over the next few weeks. But I'd say it's clear to me that Apple does care about this market. They seem to be making strides at making their devices better for these particular sports activities. Not that they're anywhere on the same level as Garmin. Pretty much any sort of cycling device that's out there on the market is made to work with Garmin. So the Epix Pro has an ANT+ wireless protocol, which is a pretty common standard for cycling components. So you can see advanced cycling metrics on the Epix Pro, and they seem to be adding new metrics all the time. Garmin, for example, has something called stamina and stamina endurance, which is two slightly different measurements of how fatigued you are, or an estimation of your fatigue. It's available for running, but it's a metric that I find most interesting when I'm actually out there biking, probably because you're out on the bike so much longer. But the Epix Pro also has a new endurance score, which is kind of like a VO2 max type of a score, but it's a little bit more information. It's taking into account your resist for fatigue, and it does provide you with training feedback with regard to that score. And the Epix Pro can also provide you traffic data when it's paired with a cycling radar. And I'd say it's a feature that I tend to use a little bit more on a dedicated cycling computer, but it's definitely nice to have on your watch as an option, just in case you happen to forget your cycling computer, or it's out of batteries, or for whatever reason. And then on the running side of things, Apple has made some huge progress within WatchOS 9. They actually introduced a track mode that is extremely impressive in my opinion. It has access to a database of tracks throughout the world now, and it'll just detect if it thinks that you're on a track, and it'll provide you with the ability to pick a lane for more accurate GPS tracking, and it'll actually lock your GPS signal onto whichever lane that you've selected. And it does end up giving you very accurate distance and pacing metrics. And I think it's interesting because Apple has this huge database of tracks, and they can actually tell you how many lane options your particular track has for you to run on. It's witchcraft, I think. But Garmin has a track mode also, where you can also pick a lane for more accurate tracking, but it isn't quite as easy to leave the track for a warm-up, come back to it, and have it all be part of one single cohesive running workout. And then just briefly, I'll mention battery life, because that's the drum that every Garmin fanboy keeps beating on. But I'm seeing about twice the battery life from the Garmin Epix Pro when compared to the Apple Watch Ultra. So about 2 or 3 days for the Apple Watch Ultra, and about 6 or 7 days for this particular size of the Garmin Epix Pro. Again, I'll leave a chart right here just because depending on which size of the Garmin Epix Pro you choose, you can actually get quite a bit more battery life here. But the Epix Pro has something something new called a hill score, which is a way of measuring how well you're running hills. The score combines hill strength and hill endurance, as well as your VO2 max estimation. Garmin has some ultra running features as well here. Rest stops are totaled and calculated for you so that you can see how much time you're spending at aid stations. A lot of cool running features specifically on the Garmin devices. So the Epix Pro is no slouch when it comes to running. But both devices will provide running power for you. And in my personal running testing, both provided accurate heart rate tracking. Here's an example of the Epix Pro here in purple compared to an ECG style chest strap here in red. And the chest strap is still the most accurate way to track heart rate data, but it is still pretty astonishing at how accurate this Epix Pro is here. The Epix Pro does have a new optical heart rate sensor for Garmin. It's called their Elevate 5.0 heart rate sensor, and it's always a little hard to tell just how much better of a sensor it is when compared to the Elevate 4.0 heart rate sensor. I wouldn't necessarily buy one watch over the other just because it has this new heart rate sensor, mostly because the 4.0 heart rate sensor was pretty good to begin with. But switching over and looking at Apple, in this case, the Apple Watch Ultra is in green, and the ECG style chest strap is again in red. Again, I'm seeing a few minor issues here, but for the most part, the heart rate data looks really good on both devices. I definitely wouldn't feel comfortable trying to crown a winner based on heart rate accuracy between these two devices. And the same kind of thing when we look at GPS accuracy when it comes to running. Both of these devices have exceptionally accurate GPS tracking. The one spot that I would perhaps crown a winner when it comes to data accuracy, especially GPS, is here when we look at open water swimming, which I know very few of you guys might be doing, but it's something somewhat important to me. Here is the Apple Watch Ultra in green, the Epix Pro in purple, and then as a reference device, I have this Forerunner 255 that sits up on top of the water, on top of a buoy, fully exposed to the satellites the entire time. So in this case, you can see that the Apple Watch Ultra, it didn't do poorly by any means. It just seems to struggle a little bit more than the Epix Pro here, which is almost perfect. And the Apple Watch Ultra did add about 1/10 of a kilometer onto the total swim here, whereas the Epix Pro was within 3/100ths of a kilometer. And then I'm a little hesitant to talk about navigation, just because the Apple Watch is kind of in the mix of changing some things with WatchOS 10. It's hard to say exactly how that's gonna look. They've added topographical maps for sure to WatchOS 10, and that's within their mapping application. However, it's yet to be seen if they're gonna add that kind of mapping detailed information to their activities. Whereas Garmin, mapping and navigation is kind of their thing. You can use a GPX file to follow a route, and you can get turn-by-turn directions, which is fantastic if you are biking or if you're doing some sort of difficult trail run. Okay, lastly, I figured we'd take a look at mobile applications, or where you manage these devices, and they're very different between these two options. Apple actually has a few locations. They have a health app, which is now available on the iPhone and the iPad, so some of your data from your watch goes to that particular application. They also have a watch application where you can manage watch faces and things like that, and then they have a fitness app. So 3 applications, but I should also mention that Apple has a very robust third-party ecosystem, both for the Apple Watch itself right on the device, as well as on the mobile device, the iPhone, that can actually access that fitness data or any sort of health data from the watch itself if given permission. For example, I really like an application called Health Fit for looking at activity data, but there's also applications like Athletica, which can give guidance on your training status, rest, recovery trends, and things like that. It is a subscription service, which is kind of the real reason that I personally don't have it. But Garmin basically has all of those recovery metrics built into it, or I should say, it's built into it, or it comes with the price of the watch. It's all centralized in Garmin's Connect application, the Garmin Connect app. And in here, you can really dive deep on any sort of activities that you've accomplished over the past few months, of course. And then, of course, any sort of health data that's been collected over the years that you've been using this particular their ecosystem. You can also look at recovery metrics like body battery, training status, training load details. There's a ton of stuff that you can dig into here. And I'd probably regret it if I didn't mention that the Apple Watch Ultra, it's only available for those people that are using iPhone devices. So it's kind of walled off, if you think about it, to 70% of the worldwide smartphone market. So I am sure that I could go on and on and on about, all these little differences between these two watches. But I think the main takeaway here is that Apple appears to be making some good progress towards that sports and fitness side of the equation with its new iteration of WatchOS 10. But Apple still feels, to me, more like a smartwatch first and a fitness watch second. Whereas Garmin's the opposite. They're still primarily a fitness watch. They're a fitness company in some ways with a few smartwatch features. And I still really hope that both of these companies are gonna work towards correcting some of those weaknesses, some of those areas where they could progress just a little bit more. Ultimately, I think we're the winners. Ultimately, the customers are the ones that win big when these companies innovate. But those are just a few of my thoughts. And again, I'd much rather hear from you guys. What do you guys think? Do you guys prefer, an Apple Watch Ultra? Do you prefer the way that Garmin does things? Do you prefer the Garmin Epix Pro? Or are you one of the massive amount of Android users who don't even have Apple Watch as an option? You guys know me, I love continuing these conversations down below in the comments section. Hopefully we'll see you down there. But either way, be sure you're getting out there swimming, biking, running, rinsing, and repeating it all over again. And we will see you guys on the next one.